He didn't take off his boots. He didn't shout for help. Commander James Carter hit that black freezing water headfirst in full Navy uniform because a woman was going under for the last time, and not one of the 50 wealthy people standing on that pier had moved a muscle. He dragged her back from the dead with his own 2 hands, a total stranger, and then he walked away, certain he'd never see her again. He was wrong. 3 nights later, at 12:43 in the morning, someone knocked on his door, and the woman he'd pulled from the harbor was standing there, soaked in fear, whispering 6 words that would tear his quiet life wide open. Before we go on, comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe some men still run toward the danger everyone else runs from, subscribe and follow along, because you won't want to miss a single part of this one. James Carter woke at 4:45 every morning, the same as he had for 19 years. Except now there was no one on the other side of the bed to tell him to sleep another hour. He lay in the dark for exactly 1 minute. He allowed himself that. 1 minute where he let his hand drift to the cold, empty half of the mattress and remembered that Claire wasn't coming back. Then the minute ended and he got up because down the hall there was a 6-year-old girl who needed her father to be a whole person, and grief was a thing he'd learned to fold up small and carry in his chest where nobody could see it. He made coffee. He laid out Sophie's clothes. He packed her lunch the way Claire used to. Crusts cut off apple, sliced a little note tucked in beside the sandwich, even though Sophie couldn't read most of the words yet. Daddy. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair a wild mess, one sock on. Hey, sailor, James said. You're up early. I had a dream about Mommy. James set the knife down. He crouched to her level the way the family counselor had taught him, so he wasn't looming over her like some tall stranger in a uniform. Yeah. What kind of dream? The good kind. She was pushing me on the swing, and she said she wasn't sad anymore. James felt something twist behind his ribs. He kept his face steady. 19 years of the Navy had taught him how to keep his face steady when everything underneath was breaking apart. That sounds like a real good dream, he said quietly. I think Mommy would want you to remember that one. Do you dream about her? He wasn't ready for that question. He was never ready for that question. Every night, baby, he said. Every single night. Now go get your other sock. We've got waffles to eat, and you've got to teach Mrs. Alvarez the whole alphabet, remember? Sophie giggled and ran off, and James stood back up and he pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for exactly 1 second, and then he went back to slicing the apple. By 700 he was in uniform, walking Sophie to the neighbor's house, where Mrs. Delgado watched her before the school bus came. Mrs. Delgado was 71, a Navy widow herself, and she was the only person alive James trusted with his daughter. You look tired, Commander, she said, taking Sophie's little backpack. I'm always tired, ma'am. You should let people help you. People help me plenty. She gave him a look. The look old women give you when they've buried a husband and raised children alone, and they can see straight through your armor. Helping you carry the girl to my door isn't the same as helping you carry the rest of it, she said. You've got walls up so high, James, I don't think anybody's climbed one in 3 years. James smiled, the polite closed smile he'd perfected. Walls keep the important things safe, ma'am. Walls keep the lonely things safe, she said. There's a difference. You'll learn it one day. He didn't answer. He kissed Sophie on the top of the head, told her to be brave and be kind and be smart in that order, the way he told her every morning, and he walked to his truck. He didn't know it yet, but Mrs. Delgado was right, and he was going to learn the difference a lot sooner than he thought. James's day was paperwork and briefings, and a young ensign named Torres who kept asking him for advice James didn't feel qualified to give. Sir, can I ask you something? Off the record. You can ask. No promises I'll answer. Torres lowered his voice. How do you do it? Everybody says you're the guy who never cracks. 19 years, 2 combat tours. You lost your wife, you're raising a kid alone, and you show up every day like a machine. How? James looked at the young man for a long moment. You want the truth, Torres? Yes, sir. I don't feel like a machine. I feel like a man walking across a frozen lake, and I can hear the ice cracking under every step, and the only thing keeping me moving is the fact that if I stop, I go under, and there's a little girl on the far shore who needs me to make it across. James let that sit. That's not strength, son. That's just fear, pointed in a useful direction. Don't let anybody tell you the two are different. Torres didn't have anything to say to that. Neither did James. He'd said more in that one moment than he'd said to anyone in months. At 1600, his commanding officer stopped him in the corridor. Carter, that maritime security gala tonight, down at Harbor Point. Sir, I filed a request to be excused from that. Request denied. The brass wants uniformed officers there. Good optics. Bunch of shipping executives and defense contractors writing checks, and they like to see real sailors in the room, makes them feel like their money matters. Sir, I've got my daughter. You've got a sitter. James's jaw tightened. I can find one. Then find one. 2 hours. Shake some hands. Look sharp. Be home by 10. That's an order. Commander, not a favor. James hated those events. Rooms full of people with more money than any human being should have. People who'd never once had to jump into anything darker than a heated swimming pool, all of them wanting to stand near a man in uniform so they could feel like they were part of something bigger than their bank accounts. But an order was an order. He called Mrs. Delgado. She said Sophie could sleep over. He told Sophie he'd be back before she woke up, and he tucked her in early, and she made him promise. And he never broke a promise to that child. You promise, Daddy. I promise, baby. Cross my heart. The whole cross. The whole cross. Every part of it. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to come very close to breaking that promise. Because a man can't come home if he's dead at the bottom of a harbor. The gala was exactly what James expected. Chandeliers. Champagne in glasses that cost more than his monthly grocery budget. Men in tuxedos that fit like they'd been sewn on. Women in dresses that shimmered when they laughed. And they laughed a lot, the kind of laughter that isn't about anything being funny. James stood near the tall windows with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, and he counted the minutes. A man in a silver suit approached him. 60-something, red-faced, already drunk. Navy, huh? Real Navy. Yes, sir. You boys still do anything out there? Or is it all robots and computers now? We still do plenty, sir. I made my money in shipping. Container ships. You know how much one of those is worth? More than a whole Navy squadron, huh? More than you'll make in 10 lifetimes, no offense. None taken, sir. You fellas are like security guards for the ocean, right? That's basically it. James looked at the man for a moment. Then he said very calmly, Something like that, sir. You have a good evening. And he walked away because his mother had raised him not to hit drunk old men at parties, and the Navy had raised him to walk away from a fight he didn't need to have. He checked his watch. 8:50. 10 more minutes, and he could leave. He stepped out onto the pier for air. The wind off the water was cold and clean, and it smelled like the only thing James had ever really understood: the sea. Out there, at least things made sense. The ocean didn't lie to you. The ocean didn't pretend to be your friend and then leave. It just was what it was: cold and honest and enormous, and James respected it the way you respect anything that could kill you without a second thought. That's when he heard it. A splash. Then a sound that wasn't the wind. A scream. James's whole body went still the way it only did when something was truly wrong. He moved to the edge of the pier and looked down into the black water, and he saw her. A woman thrashing her arms, breaking the surface, and then vanishing, her head going under and coming back up, her mouth open, gasping, no words left, just the raw animal sound of a human being drowning. Behind him, the guests were coming out onto the pier now. Someone gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God." Someone else pulled out a phone, not to help, but to record. Nobody moved. 50 people. 50. Men who ran corporations. Women dripping in diamonds. People who could buy anything in the world. And every single one of them just stood there, frozen, watching a woman die because the water was cold and dark and it wasn't their problem. "Somebody call for help," a man shouted. "Where are the lifeguards?" "Is there security? Get security." James was already moving. He didn't take off his jacket. He didn't kick off his shoes. There was no time, and he knew there was no time. The way he knew his own name, the woman had maybe 40 seconds, maybe less, and every second he wasted was a second she didn't have. "Sir!" someone yelled. "Sir, you can't, the water's freezing, you'll—" James Carter hit the water. The cold was a fist that closed around his entire body at once. It punched the air out of his lungs. Every instinct he had screamed at him to gasp to breathe, and he fought it down. He knew that first gasp underwater would kill him faster than the cold ever could. 19 years. Cold water survival training in the North Atlantic. His body remembered what his panicking mind wanted to forget. Don't fight the water. Move through it. He came up, found her 6 feet away, going under again, and he closed the distance in 3 hard strokes. She grabbed him. That was the thing they warned you about. A drowning person doesn't hug you. A drowning person tries to climb you, drags you down, uses your body as a ladder to the surface, and takes you both to the bottom. Her hands clawed at his face, his collar, his throat, pure animal terror with no thought in it at all. "Stop, stop fighting me." James got out, choking on a mouthful of harbor water. "I've got you. I've got you. Let me help you." She couldn't hear him. She was past hearing anything. So he did what the training taught. He spun her, got behind her, locked one arm across her chest under her arms, and pinned her back against his own chest, so she couldn't turn and drown them both. "I've got you," he said into her ear, low and steady, the voice he used on Sophie during a nightmare. "You're not going to die tonight. Not tonight. Kick with me. Come on, kick." The pier looked 100 miles away. His uniform was a soaked anchor, dragging him down, his boots full of water, and every stroke was harder than the last. The cold was in his bones now, and his teeth in the marrow of him. "Somebody get a rope," he roared up at the pier. A rope, a life ring, anything move. Above him, finally the frozen crowd broke. A man ran. Someone was yelling for security. But James wasn't counting on any of them. He'd learned a long time ago that the only hands you could count on in dark water were your own. He kicked. 1 stroke. 2. The woman went limp in his arms. She'd passed out. And part of him was almost glad, because at least now she wasn't fighting him. "Stay with me," he growled. "Don't you quit. I did not jump into this water to pull up a dead woman. You stay with me." His shoulder screamed. His lungs were fire. The cold was trying to shut his whole system down, and he was refusing 1 stroke at a time out of pure stubborn refusal to let the ocean win. Somebody finally threw a life ring. It hit the water 3 feet to his left. He lunged, caught it, jammed the woman's limp arms through it, and held on. "Pull!" he shouted. "Pull us in, now!" And they pulled. How? They dragged both of them up onto the pier, and James rolled onto his knees, coughing up seawater, his whole body shaking so violently he couldn't have stood if his life depended on it. The woman wasn't breathing. James didn't think. He'd done this in training 100 times, and in the real world twice, and his hands knew the way even when his mind was too cold to work. "Move back. Give her room." He tilted her head, checked her airway, laced his fingers, and started compressions. Come on, don't you do this." The crowd formed a ring around them, phones out, faces pale. Is she dead? Somebody said an ambulance is coming. Should he be doing that? Does he even know? "Shut up," James snapped, not looking up, counting under his breath. "Everybody shut up." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. He tilted her chin, pinched her nose, breathed for her. 30 more. "Come on, ma'am. You didn't come this far to quit on me. Breathe. Breathe." Nothing. James Carter had watched his wife die. He'd stood in a hospital hallway and been told there was nothing anyone could do, and he had never in his life felt as powerless as he did in that moment. And he had sworn that if he was ever again in a position to keep death from taking someone, he would not stop. He would not quit. He would break his own hands before he let go. He breathed for her again, and she convulsed. Water came up out of her, a lungful of it, and she rolled and coughed and choked and gasped, this huge tearing gasp, and she was breathing. She was alive, and the crowd made a sound like a single held breath finally releasing. "There you are," James said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "There you are. I've got you. You're okay. You're okay now." She looked up at him. Her eyes barely focused. But they found his, and they held on. "You're safe," James told her. "You're safe. I've got you." Her lips moved. Barely a sound. But he heard it. "Why? What? Why did nobody else?" She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. James understood the question completely. Why did 50 people watch me drown and only you jump? He didn't have an answer that would help her. So he just said, "Doesn't matter. I did. That's all that matters now. Stay awake for me." Then, the paramedics came. They wrapped her in silver blankets and loaded her onto a stretcher, and they wrapped James in one too, and a young EMT kept staring at him. "Sir, you jumped in your full uniform." Somebody had to. "With respect, sir, the water's about 48 degrees. You had maybe a couple minutes before your muscles stopped working. You know that. I know that. You could have died." James looked at the young man, and for a second, all the exhaustion he'd been holding back for 3 years showed in his face. "Son, there are worse things than dying," he said. "Standing on a pier, watching somebody drown, and doing nothing, that's one of them." The EMT didn't know what to say to that. Nobody ever did. A man in an expensive coat pushed through the crowd toward the stretcher. Late 40s, silver at the temples, the kind of handsome that money buys and maintains. His face was arranged into concern, but James, who'd spent 19 years reading men in dangerous situations, saw something underneath it that didn't match. Something cold. "Natalie? Natalie, my God!" the man said, reaching for her. The woman on the stretcher flinched. It was small. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but James caught it because James had learned in a courtroom during the worst months of his life exactly what it looks like when a person is afraid of someone they're supposed to trust. "Sir, please step back, we need to move her," the paramedic said. "I'm her fiancé, Victor Langford. I'm coming with her." The woman Natalie grabbed the paramedic's sleeve. Her voice was a thread. "No, please, I don't want." "She's in shock," Victor said smoothly, already climbing toward the ambulance. "She doesn't know what she's saying. Natalie, darling, I'm right here." James stepped forward before he decided to. She said no. Victor turned, looked at James for the first time, took in the soaked uniform, the shivering, the water still dripping off him, and something behind Victor's eyes did the math and decided James was nobody. "And you are the man who just pulled her out of the water while you were doing what exactly?" The two men held each other's eyes for a long, cold second. "You have my gratitude, sailor," Victor said, and the word sailor was an insult in his mouth. "I'll see that you're compensated. Now, if you'll excuse me, my fiancée needs her family." "She needs whatever she says she needs," James answered. And she said no. The paramedic caught between them made the call. "Sir, only one rider and the patient's refusing. You can follow in your car." Victor's jaw flexed. For just a moment, the concern slipped completely off his face, and what was underneath it was pure controlled fury, and James saw it, saw all of it, and filed it away. Then the mask came back. "Of course," Victor said. "Whatever's best for Natalie." The doors closed. The ambulance pulled away, and Victor Langford turned and looked at James one more time. A long, measuring look, the look of a man memorizing a face he intended to deal with later before he walked to a black car that was waiting for him. James stood there dripping in the cold, and every instinct he had, every instinct 19 years of dangerous work had carved into him, was ringing like an alarm bell. Something is wrong here. Something is very wrong. Then he shook it off. It wasn't his business. He'd done his job. The woman was alive. That was the end of it. He drove home. He peeled off the ruined uniform. He stood under a hot shower until the shaking stopped, and he thought about the way that woman had flinched and the way that man had looked at him, and he told himself it was none of his concern. He got to Mrs. Delgado's at midnight and carried his sleeping daughter home in his arms, and she stirred and murmured, "You came back." And he said, "Always, baby, I always come back." And he believed right then that the whole strange night was over. He was wrong about that, too. The story, it turned out, didn't stay quiet. By morning, someone's phone video was everywhere. Navy officer dives into harbor to save drowning heiress. They didn't have James's name at first, just an unidentified Navy officer, and he was grateful for that. The last thing he wanted was attention. At work, they knew. Of course they knew. "Carter." His CO caught him in the corridor, and for once the man's voice had no edge in it. "That was you." "Yes, sir." 48-degree water." "Yes, sir." The CO studied him for a moment. "You know, most men would have waited for rescue crews. By the time rescue crews got there, sir, we'd have been recovering a body instead of saving a life." The CO nodded slowly. "The Navy's proud of you, Commander. I'm proud of you." A pause. "The woman you pulled out. You know who that is. A woman who was drowning, sir, that's all I know. Natalie Brooks, Brooks Maritime. Her father built one of the biggest private shipping empires on this coast. Died last year, left the whole thing to her. She's worth I don't even know. Hundreds of millions. More." James absorbed that. "Didn't change anything, sir. If she'd been broke, I'd have jumped the same." "I know you would," the CO said. "That's exactly why the Navy needs men like you. Go home, Carter. You've earned a quiet week." James wanted a quiet week more than anything in the world. He wasn't going to get one. The days passed. James went back to his routine. Sophie coffee sliced apples, walking her to Mrs. Delgado's, the base home again. He didn't watch the news. He didn't read the articles. When Torres tried to congratulate him, he said, "Torres, if you bring it up again, I'll have you scrubbing the motor pool." And Torres wisely dropped it. But something nagged at him. That flinch. That fury under Victor Langford's polished face. The way Natalie had grabbed the paramedic's sleeve and said, "No, please, I don't want," and hadn't been able to finish the sentence. He kept telling himself it wasn't his business. He almost believed it. Sophie, of course, saw straight through him the way she saw through everything. "Daddy, you're doing the thing." "What thing, baby?" "The staring thing, where your face is here but your brain went somewhere else." James blinked. He was standing at the kitchen counter with a dish towel in his hand, and no memory of picking it up. "Sorry, sailor. Daddy's just tired." "Are you thinking about the lady?" He went still. "What lady?" "Mrs. Delgado said you saved a lady from the water, like a superhero." Sophie looked up at him with those enormous eyes, Claire's eyes, the eyes that undid him a little more every single day. "Is the lady okay?" James crouched down. "I don't know, baby. I hope so." "Did you make sure?" "What?" "When I fall down, you don't just pick me up. You make sure I'm okay after. You always make sure." Sophie said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, because to her it was. "Did you make sure the lady's okay after?" And James Carter, Navy commander, 19 years of service, a man who'd faced down things that would break most people, was rendered completely speechless by his 6-year-old daughter. Because she was right. He'd pulled Natalie Brooks out of the water, but he hadn't made sure she was okay after. He'd let a man with cold fury behind his eyes walk toward her, and he'd driven home and told himself it wasn't his business. "You're a smart kid, you know that." He said, his voice rough. "I know," Sophie said, and went back to her coloring. That night, after he'd tucked her in, James sat in the dark for a long time, and the nagging feeling wouldn't let him go. 3 nights after the harbor, James couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark and listened to the house tick and settle, and he thought about the sea, and he thought about the woman he'd pulled out of it, and he thought about the way she'd looked up at him and asked, why did nobody else? At 12:41 a.m., he was staring at the ceiling. At 12:42, he heard something. A car. Slowing on his street. He knew the sound of every car that belonged on this street, the same way he knew the sound of his own ship, and this one didn't belong. It slowed and stopped, and the engine cut. James was up and moving before he'd finished the thought. Old instincts. He crossed to the window, stayed to the side of it, and looked out. A figure was coming up his walk. Alone. Unsteady. Hood up against the cold. He moved to Sophie's door first. Always Sophie first, and found her sleeping safe, and he pulled her door most of the way shut. Then he went down the stairs in the dark, silent, and he stood by the front door and waited, every sense wide awake. At 12:43 a.m., someone knocked. Soft, almost too soft to hear. Not the knock of someone who wanted to be let in. The knock of someone who had nowhere else on earth to go. James opened the door, and Natalie Brooks was standing on his porch. She looked nothing like the polished heiress from the news photos. No makeup, hair wet from the cold drizzle, a coat 2 sizes too big, like she'd grabbed the first thing she could find. And her eyes. Her eyes were the eyes of a hunted animal, darting past his shoulder, checking the street behind her, terrified. "Ma'am," James said carefully. "How did you—" "The Navy office. I'm sorry. I told them I needed to thank the officer who they weren't supposed to give me your address. I know I made them. I'm sorry." The words tumbled out of her, shaking. "I know it's insane. I know it's the middle of the night. I know you don't know me. I've been driving around for 2 hours trying to think of a single person left that I could trust, and there's—" Her voice broke. "There's nobody. There's nobody, do you understand? Everybody I know he knows. Everyone I'd go to, he got to first." "Slow down," James said. "You're safe. Nobody's here but me. Slow down." She pressed her back against the porch rail like she needed something solid to hold her up. She was crying now, but silently, the way people cry when they've learned that making noise is dangerous. "3 nights ago, you jumped into that water," she said. 50 people watched me go under, and you were the only one who moved. I've been in a room with every one of those 50 people. I've had dinner with them. I've given them money. I've shaken their hands, and not one of them—" She stopped, swallowed. "But a stranger did. A stranger in a uniform with no idea who I was, with nothing to gain, jumped into freezing water and almost died for me. Anybody would have—" "No!" The word came out fierce. "No, they wouldn't have. That's the whole point. They didn't. You did." She wiped her face with the back of a shaking hand. "And I've been lying in a hospital bed for 3 days, and lying awake in a house that doesn't feel safe anymore, thinking the only person in my entire life who ever did anything for me without wanting something back is a man whose name I didn't even know until yesterday." James stood very still in the doorway. "You should be with your family," he said quietly. With your fiancé, Langford." The name landed on her like a blow. She flinched, the same flinch he'd seen on the pier, and now he understood it completely. "Please don't say his name," she whispered. "Please." "Ma'am." Natalie. James looked at her, really looked. At the fear that wasn't the fear of the water anymore. At the way she kept checking the dark street behind her. At a woman worth hundreds of millions of dollars standing on a stranger's porch in the middle of the night in a coat that wasn't hers, with nowhere in the entire world to go. "What are you running from?" Natalie Brooks looked up at him, and James watched her decide, watched her make the hardest decision a frightened person can make, which is the decision to trust one more time after trust has nearly killed you. "I don't know who else I can trust anymore," she whispered. "But I know I can trust you." And for a long moment, on a cold porch at 12:43 in the morning, neither of them said anything at all. Then, from the top of the stairs behind James, a small, sleepy voice said, "Daddy, who's at the door?" And Natalie's eyes went to the little girl in the pajamas, and something in her face, something that had been locked shut and drowning for a very long time, cracked wide open. "Go back to bed, sailor," James said gently, not taking his eyes off the woman on his porch. "Everything's all right. Daddy's just letting somebody in from the cold." He stepped back from the door, and he held it open. Part 2. She stepped inside, and James closed the door behind her, and for the first time in 3 years, someone who wasn't Sophie was standing in his living room at 1 o'clock in the morning. "Sit," he said. "You're shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You almost drowned 3 days ago, and you've been driving around in the cold for 2 hours. Sit down before you fall down. I've seen the second one, and it's worse." She sat on the very edge of his couch, her hands wrapped around her own arms. James went to the closet and pulled out a blanket, one of the few things of hers he hadn't been able to give away, and he draped it over her shoulders without a word. Then he went into the kitchen and put the kettle on, because his mother had taught him that you don't ask a frightened person the hard questions until you've put something warm in their hands. "I'm going to make you some tea," he called. "I don't have anything fancy. I've got the kind that comes in a box from the grocery store, and I've got coffee that'll keep you up till Tuesday. Tea's the better call." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He came back in and crouched in front of her, so he was below her eye level, not looming. Sophie's counselor had taught him that too. "Natalie, look at me. You came to my door. That means part of you already decided to trust me. So, let me do the small things first. Let me make you tea and get you warm, and then when you're ready, only when you're ready, you tell me what's going on. Nobody's rushing you. Nobody's coming through that door. Okay?" She looked at him with those hunted eyes, and slowly, some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." He stood. "How do you take it?" A strange, wet laugh came out of her. "I have no idea. Nobody's ever asked me that. There's always somebody who just hands me the cup they decided I should have." James went still for half a second. Then he said, "Well, around here you get to decide. So, sugar milk, both, neither." "Sugar, please, a little sugar, coming up." He came back with 2 mugs and handed her one, and he sat down in the armchair across from her, far enough that she didn't feel crowded close enough that she wasn't alone. He wrapped both hands around his own mug and waited. She stared into the tea for a long time. "I keep thinking about your daughter's voice," she said finally. "Just now. Daddy, who's at the door." Natalie's throat worked. "I don't remember the last time I heard a house sound like that. Safe, sleepy, normal. My father's houses always sounded like waiting. Like everyone in them was waiting for the next thing to go wrong." "How old were you when your mother passed?" She looked up, startled. "How did you—" "You said my father's houses, not my parents." James shrugged. "I've gotten good at hearing the shape of what people don't say. Comes with the job." Natalie let out a breath. 9. I was 9. After that it was just me and my father, and a lot of very large, very empty houses, and a rotating cast of people my father paid to raise me. She took a sip of the tea. "He wasn't a bad man. He just loved the company more than he loved anything with a heartbeat, including me, especially me. And when he died, he left the company to you." "He left the company to me," she agreed, and something bitter moved across her face. Which everyone found very surprising, because I'd spent my whole life being told I wasn't capable of running it. By my father, by the board, by— She stopped. "By Victor," James said quietly. She flinched at the name, but she didn't ask him to stop this time. She just nodded once and stared back down into her tea. "Tell me about him," James said. "In your own words. Take your time." "He came into my life about 8 months before my father died," Natalie began. "My father introduced us. Victor Langford. He'd built his own company, sold it, made a fortune, and he moved in the same circles as my father, shipping logistics that whole world. My father loved him, kept saying, "Now here's a man who understands business, Natalie. Here's a man who could really take care of you." James said nothing. He'd learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone is finally telling the truth is stay quiet and let them. And Victor was God, he was perfect. At first, he remembered everything I said. He'd bring me coffee the exact way I liked it before I even asked. He'd notice when I was tired and clear my schedule. He'd stand between me and anyone who was unkind to me at those horrible dinner parties. Her voice cracked. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To me, after a lifetime of nobody noticing whether I lived or died, to have someone notice everything? It felt like being loved, James said. It felt like being loved, she echoed. For about 6 months, it felt like the only real thing that had ever happened to me. When did it change? Natalie was quiet for a moment. It didn't change all at once. That's the thing nobody understands. It's not like there was a day where the nice man became a monster. It was so slow, I didn't even see it happening. It was... She searched for the words. It was the coffee. The coffee. He'd bring me the coffee the way I liked it. And then one day he brought me a different kind and said, "You've been drinking too much caffeine. I got you the half-caff. It's better for your nerves." And I said, okay. Because he was being thoughtful, right? He was taking care of me. And then it was, "You don't need to go to that meeting. I'll handle it. You get so anxious in those rooms." And I said, okay. And then it was, "I don't think you should see Diane anymore. She's a bad influence. She puts ideas in your head." Diane, your friend? My best friend, since college. The only person from before who... Natalie pressed her lips together. I said, okay. I said okay to all of it. One okay at a time. And every single one felt small. Every single one felt like love. And by the time I looked up, I couldn't have coffee I liked. I couldn't go to my own board meetings. I couldn't see my own friends, and I'd said okay to every step of it myself. James set his mug down. That's how it works, he said quietly. It's never one big cage. It's 100 small okays. And the person doing it makes sure you're the one who locks each door so that later when you finally look around you think, I did this to myself. I let this happen. It must be my fault. Natalie stared at him. How do you know that? How do you know exactly how that feels? James looked at his hands. And then he made a decision of his own. The decision to trust her back. Because trust that only runs one direction isn't trust at all, it's just an interrogation. Because I sat in a courtroom for 4 months while a very good lawyer took every true thing about my life and turned it into evidence that I was unfit, he said, one small piece at a time. She didn't say anything. She just watched him. And James, who never talked about this, who had folded it up small and buried it years ago, found himself unfolding it in his own living room at 1 a.m. for a woman he'd met once in the water. When Claire died, he said, "My wife, when she died, it was sudden, an aneurysm. She was 34. There was no warning. One morning she had a headache, and by that night she was gone, and I was standing in a hospital hallway holding a 3-year-old who kept asking where Mommy was." James, let me get through it. He took a breath. Claire had a sister, Diane, no sorry, different name, Rachel. Rachel. She and Claire were close, and Rachel loved Sophie, and I understand. I understand now that she was grieving too, and grief makes people do things. But at the time, all I knew was that 6 weeks after I buried my wife, I got served with papers. Rachel was petitioning for custody of my daughter. On what grounds? On the grounds that I was an active-duty Navy officer who could be deployed at any time, who worked long hours, who had no wife and no plan for childcare, and who was, and I'm quoting the filing, emotionally compromised by recent loss and temperamentally unsuited to the daily demands of single parenthood. He said it flatly, the way you say words you've had memorized against your will for years. And every single thing in that sentence was true, Natalie. That's what nobody understands. Every fact was true. I was active duty. I could be deployed. I did work long hours. I was emotionally compromised. My wife had just died. Of course I was. But that doesn't mean I was unfit. No. But you take enough true things and you arrange them the right way, and you can build a story that isn't true at all out of nothing but facts. And a good lawyer knows exactly how to do that. His jaw tightened. They had a psychologist evaluate me. Court-appointed, supposedly neutral. He asked me how I was sleeping, and I told the truth badly. He asked if I ever felt overwhelmed, and I told the truth every day. He asked if I'd cried in front of my daughter, and I told the truth yes, and I'd hold her while I did it, because I wanted her to know it's okay to be sad about mommy. And all of that, every honest human answer went into a report that said I was unstable. Natalie's hand had risen to her mouth. That's when I learned it, James said. The lesson you're living right now. That the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a lie. It's the truth bent. Because you can't fight the truth. You can't stand up and say, that's not real, when every fact is real. All you can do is fight for the shape of it. And most people don't know how. Most people just sit there and watch someone rearrange the facts of their whole life into a shape they don't recognize, and they think that can't be me. That's a monster they're describing, but it has my name on it. How did you win? Natalie whispered. James was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't, he said. For about 2 months I was losing, because I kept trying to argue with their story, and you can't argue with a story. All you do is add more facts for them to bend. He looked up at her. And then a friend of mine, a JAG officer, sat me down and said, Carter, you're fighting this like a sailor. Stop. You need to fight it like they're fighting it. They built a story out of facts, so build a better one out of your facts. And you did. And I did. I documented everything. Every morning I got Sophie up dressed, fed to daycare, I logged it. Every night I was home for dinner, I logged it. I got sworn statements from her teachers, her doctor, the neighbors, my CO. I got the Navy to put in writing my deployment status and my stateside posting. And I got my own psychologist one, who understood the difference between grief and instability, to evaluate me honestly. He spread his hands. I didn't win by proving their facts were false. Their facts were true. I won by drowning their story in more truth than it could hold. Facts, Natalie. Not feelings, not arguments. Facts stacked so high the story underneath them couldn't breathe. Natalie was crying again, but it was different now, not the silent, frightened crying from the porch. Something had shifted in her. That's what he's doing, she said. That's exactly what Victor is doing to me, isn't it? I don't know yet, James said honestly. I only know your side of it, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you've been through hell. But I've heard enough to know one thing for sure. He leaned forward. You are not crazy. Whatever he's told you, whatever the shape is that he's built around you, you are not crazy. And you are not unstable. And the fact that you're sitting here, able to tell me all of this in the middle of the night, after nearly dying, tells me your mind is working just fine. So, whatever comes next, you hold on to that. All right. You are not the person he's telling the world you are. You. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and nodded and cried, and James let her, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is not try to fix it, just be there while it hurts. When she'd steadied, she wiped her face and said, There's more. It's worse than you think. Tell me. So she told him. After my father died and the company came to me, Victor changed the way he talked about the future. Before it was all partnership. After it was protection. You have so much on your plate now, Natalie. Let me shield you from the worst of it. The board's difficult. Let me handle them. The finances are complicated. Let me oversee them. You focus on healing. She shook her head. And I let him. Of course I let him. I was drowning in grief, and there was this steady, capable man saying, Let me carry it. What was I supposed to do? Say yes, James said. Anybody would have said yes. About 3 months ago, I got curious about a contract. Nothing dramatic. Just a shipping agreement Victor had negotiated, and something about the numbers didn't sit right with me. And I have a business degree, James. I'm not my father spent my whole life telling me I couldn't do this, and Victor picked up right where my father left off. But the truth is, I understand this company. I grew up in it. So I looked at the contract myself without telling Victor, and the numbers were wrong. The terms were bad for us, and good for a third party, and when I traced the third party, it connected back to Victor. To a company Victor has a hidden stake in. Yes. Her eyes were hard now, and James saw for the first time the woman underneath, the woman who'd been buried under 100 small OKs. He's been quietly moving money out of my company and into his own pocket for months. And I think that's why the marriage got fast-tracked. Right after my father died, suddenly Victor wanted the wedding now. This spring, he had a whole timeline, and I couldn't figure out why the rush until I understood if we're married, and if he can convince everyone I'm not capable of managing my own affairs, then he controls the company, James finished. Legally, cleanly, and nobody asks questions because everyone already believes the story he's built, that poor, unstable Natalie needed her strong husband to take care of things. Yes. James sat back. The pieces were fitting together, and he didn't like the picture they made. So, what happened at the harbor? He asked. The real version, not the version the news has. Natalie's hands started shaking again, and she gripped the mug harder to stop them. I confronted him, she said. That's what happened. I found the last piece I needed, a document, a real document connecting him to that shell company. And I was so angry, James, I wasn't thinking, and I confronted him that night at the gala, on the pier, away from the crowd. I told him I knew. I told him I was going to the board and to a lawyer and that the wedding was off. What did he do? He didn't yell. That's the thing about Victor. He never yells. She swallowed. He got very, very calm. And he said, Natalie, sweetheart, think about what you're saying. Think about how it's going to look. A grieving woman, unstable since her father died, making wild accusations against the fiancé who's been holding her together. Who's going to believe you? The board already has concerns about your state of mind. I've made sure of that. James's jaw went tight. He told you, he said. He told you to your face he'd been poisoning the board against you. He told me to my face, because he thought there was nothing I could do about it. He thought he'd already won. Her voice dropped. And then, I said something like, I have proof, Victor. Real proof. And I'm going to burn your whole empire down with it. And I turned to walk away. And I was close to the edge. It was dark. The pier was wet. She stopped. James waited. And I fell, Natalie whispered. I fell into the water. And I have gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I cannot tell you whether I slipped or whether there was a hand on my back. Her eyes came up to his, wide and desperate. I don't know, James. I've been trying to remember, and I don't know if he pushed me or if I just fell, and it's driving me insane, because if I say he pushed me and I'm wrong, then I really am the crazy woman making wild accusations. And if I say I fell and he did push me, stop, James said gently. Stop. Here's what you know for sure. You know you went into the water. Yes. You know he was standing right there close enough to catch you or to push you, either one. Yes. And you know that once you were in the water, drowning, screaming, what did he do? Natalie's face went cold and still. He watched, she said. For a moment. I remember that part. I remember coming up and seeing him standing at the edge, just looking down at me. Not moving. Not reaching for me. Just watching. And then, I don't know how long, it felt like forever. Then he started calling for help. Loudly. Making sure everyone heard him calling for help. Her voice broke. He wanted witnesses to see him calling for help, but there weren't any witnesses to what happened before. To the part where he just stood there and watched me go under. James was very quiet for a long moment. So here's what I actually know, he said slowly. I don't know if he pushed you. You're right that we can't prove that, and you're right not to claim it if you're not sure. But I know this: a man who loves you doesn't stand on a pier and watch you drown while he composes himself for the audience. Whatever happened in the second before you went in, what happened after, tells me everything I need to know about Victor Langford. He'd say he was in shock, frozen. People freeze. People do freeze, James agreed. I watched 50 people freeze on that pier 3 nights ago. But you know who wasn't frozen? The man engaged to marry the woman in the water. He wasn't frozen. He was calculating. There's a difference, and I've seen enough men in enough dangerous moments to know it when I see it. Frozen people don't remember to perform for the crowd. Natalie stared at him. And then she said the thing that James would think about for a long time afterward. You were the only one who wasn't calculating, she said. 50 people did math. Is it safe? Is it my problem? Is somebody filming? And you just jumped. You did the thing before the math could even start. James looked uncomfortable. It's not that noble. I've been trained for 2 decades to move before the math. That's all that is. Reflex. No, Natalie said, and there was steel in it. Don't do that. Don't make it small. My whole life I've been surrounded by people who calculate. My father calculated. Victor calculated everything down to the coffee. And you, a stranger with nothing to gain, you looked at a person drowning, and you didn't run a single calculation, you just went. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand that in 34 years, I have never once met a person who would do that for me? James didn't have an answer for that. The kettle had gone cold. The clock read 1:40. Somewhere upstairs the house was quiet. Sophie sleeping the deep sleep of a child who has never once had reason to doubt that her father would keep her safe. So what do you want from me? James asked. Not unkindly. He needed to know. You didn't drive here in the middle of the night just to tell me your story, Natalie. You could have told a lawyer that. What is it you actually need? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't fully know. That's the honest answer. I think I needed to be somewhere that Victor doesn't know about. Just for tonight. Just to think in a place where I'm not being watched. She laughed a small broken sound. You have no idea how long it's been since I've been anywhere he didn't know about. He tracks my phone. He knows my schedule. He has a key to my house. There is nowhere in my entire life he can't reach except here. He doesn't know you exist. He thinks you're just some sailor he'll write a check to. He knows I exist, James said. She looked up sharply. What? On the pier. When you told the paramedic you didn't want him riding with you and I backed you up, he looked at me, really looked, the way a man looks at something he's planning to deal with later. James held her eyes. I don't think he's forgotten me, Natalie. And if he finds out you're here, he's going to remember exactly who I am. The fear came flooding back into her face. Then I shouldn't have come. Oh God, I've put you in. You have a daughter I shouldn't have. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. This was selfish. I wasn't thinking. I'll go. I'll figure out something else. Sit down. James. Natalie, sit down. He didn't raise his voice, but there was something in it that stopped her. The quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed in a crisis. She sat. Now listen to me. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, because I don't say things I don't mean. She waited. When I was in that courtroom, James said, fighting for Sophie, there was a stretch where I thought I was going to lose her. Where I lay awake at night and imagined a life where my little girl was raised by someone else because a story I couldn't fight had decided I was unfit. And I was completely alone in it because I'd built these walls and I hadn't let anybody in, and there was nobody to call at 2 a.m. when the fear got so bad I couldn't breathe. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. And I swore to myself that if I ever got out of it, If I ever got to keep my daughter, I would never again watch somebody drown in a story that isn't true and tell myself it wasn't my business. Because that's the coward's version of freezing. And I already did enough freezing in that courtroom to last me a lifetime. Natalie was very still. You didn't put me in danger by coming here, James said. You gave me a chance to be the man I promised myself I'd be. So don't you dare apologize for it. And don't you dare walk back out that door thinking you're alone in this. Because as of right now, you're not. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she said in a very small voice, "Why you don't know me? Why would you do this for me?" And James gave her the same answer he'd give at a board meeting weeks later in front of a room full of powerful people, the answer that would become the truest thing anyone ever said about him. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And I was there. That's the whole reason. It was never anything more complicated than that." Yummed. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning. Not about the plan, it was too late, and she was too exhausted for a plan. James wouldn't let her get into strategy in the state she was in. "Tired people make bad decisions," he told her. "And frightened people make worse ones. You're both. Whatever we're going to do, we do it in daylight with sleep and food in us. That's not me being soft. That's operational discipline. You don't plan an op at 3 a.m. running on adrenaline and terror. You just don't. You keep saying we," Natalie said. James paused. "I do, don't I?" "You barely know me." "I know enough." He stood and took the mugs to the kitchen. "You'll take Sophie's reading nook tonight. There's a daybed in there. It's more comfortable than the couch. I'll be right down the hall. Door stays unlocked between us, so you can call out if you need anything, but the front door's bolted, and I'll hear anybody who comes within 50 feet of this house. I always do." "You don't sleep." "I sleep light," he corrected. "Big difference. 19 years of light." She stood wrapping Claire's blanket back around her shoulders. "James, one more thing. And I need you to be honest with me because everybody in my life lies to me to protect me, and I am so tired of being protected from the truth. I don't lie. Ask anyone. It's cost me more than it's ever saved me. What is it?" Natalie took a breath. "How much danger are you actually in for helping me? Don't soften it. I need to know what I'm asking of you before I let you say yes." James considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. "Real danger," he said. "I won't lie to you. A man like Langford with money and lawyers and a reputation to protect and hundreds of millions on the line. He's not going to fight fair, and he's going to come at whatever's in his way. And right now, that's you, and soon, that's going to be me. He'll dig into my record. He'll try to make me into a story too, the lonely widower manipulated by a rich woman or worse. He'll use the fact that I have a daughter as pressure. He'll do all of it, because that's what men like him do." He met her eyes. "So, yeah, real danger. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Natalie's face fell. "Then I can't ask you to." "But here's the other half of the truth," James went on, "because you asked for all of it. I've been in real danger before. I've been in water that should have killed me, and situations I'm not allowed to tell you about, and a courtroom where I nearly lost the only thing I have left in this world. And I'm still standing. So Victor Langford doesn't frighten me the way he frightens you, because you've only ever seen the shape of him, the money and the lawyers and the reputation. And I've learned that the shape of a powerful man and the substance of him are two completely different things." He almost smiled. "He's built his whole life on people being too scared to check whether there's anything behind the shape. I'm not scared. So, I'm going to check." Natalie looked at him for a long, long moment. "You're a strange man, James Carter," she said softly. "So I've been told." "I mean it as the highest compliment I know how to give." "Then I'll take it as one. Go to bed, Natalie. Reading nook's the second door on the left. Careful of the beanbag chair, Sophie leaves it in the doorway to trap intruders." Her words. And for the first time since he'd met her, since he'd dragged her half-dead out of a black harbor, Natalie Brooks laughed. A real laugh, small and surprised like something that had been locked away for a very long time, had just found a crack to slip through. "Good night, Commander," she said. "Good night, ma'am." Tch. James didn't sleep much that night, but that was nothing new. He lay in the dark and listened to the unfamiliar sound of another adult breathing in his house. And he thought about the woman down the hall and the story she'd told, and he ran the whole thing through his mind the way he'd run a mission brief, looking for the weak points, the gaps, the places where Victor Langford would be strongest, and the places where he'd be exposed. Around 4, he heard Sophie's door open. Small feet in the hallway. He was up in an instant. "Sophie, what's wrong, baby?" She was standing in the hall in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "There's a lady in my reading nook." James crouched down. "I know, sweetheart. I know. Remember the lady I told you about, the one from the water?" Sophie's eyes went wide. "The one you saved?" "That's the one. Her name's Natalie. And she's having a real hard time right now, baby. Some people are being unkind to her and she didn't have anywhere safe to go. So she's going to stay with us for a little while. Is that okay with you?" Sophie considered this with the enormous seriousness that 6-year-olds bring to important questions. "Is she scared?" Sophie asked. James's throat tightened. "Yeah, sailor. She's real scared." "Then she should stay," Sophie said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "When you're scared, you shouldn't be alone. That's what you always tell me." And James pulled his daughter into his arms and held her, and over the top of her head, he saw in the doorway of the reading nook, Natalie standing in the dark, awake, having heard all of it, one hand pressed over her mouth, and tears streaming silently down her face. Not the tears of a frightened woman anymore. The tears of someone who had forgotten for a very long time what it felt like to be somewhere she was wanted. "Come on," James whispered to Sophie. "Back to bed. Both of my girls need sleep." And he caught himself on the word "both of my girls," and he saw Natalie catch it too. And neither of them said anything about it, but something passed between them in the dark hallway at 4 in the morning that neither of them had words for yet. He tucked Sophie back in. He passed Natalie in the hall. "She's right, you know," Natalie whispered. "You do always tell her that. I can hear it in how she says it. Tell her what? That when you're scared, you shouldn't be alone." Natalie's eyes were shining. "Nobody ever told me that. Not once in 34 years. James stood there in the dark, and he thought about all the years he'd spent building walls, and about a 71-year-old widow telling him, "Walls keep the lonely thing safe," and about the difference between the two that he was only now at nearly 40 beginning to understand. "Well," he said quietly, "somebody's telling you now." And he went back to his room, and this time, when he lay down, he slept. Part 3. Morning came, and with it, the war began. James woke at 6:15 to the smell of coffee he hadn't made and the sound of 2 voices in his kitchen. One small and delighted one, soft and careful. He came down the stairs and found Sophie sitting on the counter, swinging her legs, narrating the entire operation of making pancakes to a woman who was clearly trying very hard to follow instructions from a 6-year-old. "No, you have to flip it when the bubbles come." "When the bubbles come, Natalie. Not before. You flipped it before." "I panicked. There was a lot of pressure." "Daddy never panics." "Daddy," said Natalie, "has had more practice than me." James leaned in the doorway and watched for a moment, and something in his chest that had been clenched shut for 3 years loosened just slightly. "That first one's a sacrifice to the pancake gods," he said. "Everybody's first pancake is garbage. It's tradition." Natalie turned, and there was color in her face this morning, and the hunted look in her eyes had faded to something more like exhaustion. "Your daughter is a very demanding teacher." "She gets it from her mother." He said it easily and then realized he'd said it easily, said Claire's name, or near enough without the usual weight, and it surprised him. "Sophie Sailor, go get dressed. Bus comes in 40 minutes, and you are not going to school in pajamas. Can Natalie walk me to Mrs. Delgado's?" The kitchen went quiet. "No, baby," James said gently. "Not today. Natalie's going to stay here where it's warm, but I'll walk you same as always." Sophie accepted this and scampered off, and the moment she was gone, the lightness went out of the room, and the reality of the day came back in. "She can't be seen," Natalie said quietly. That's what you meant. If anyone saw me walking your daughter to a sitter's house, then the whole thing's on the news by noon. And Victor knows exactly where you are, and my daughter's face is in it too. James poured himself coffee. Yeah, as long as you're here, you're a ghost. Nobody sees you. Nobody knows. That's the only way this works. I hate that I've made your daughter part of this. You didn't. I did when I opened the door. He took a sip. And she'd have been part of it anyway. She's part of everything I am. There's no version of me that helps you where Sophie's not in the house. So stop apologizing for a choice I made with my eyes open, and let's figure out what we're actually going to do. He walked Sophie to Mrs. Delgado's, and the old woman met him at the door and gave him a long look. You've got a light on in the house that wasn't on before, she said. James went still. Ma'am? Don't ma'am me, James Carter. I've watched that house for 3 years. Curtains drawn tight, 1 lamp in bed by 10. This morning there were 2 lamps on before dawn, and I could hear a woman laughing. She raised an eyebrow. I'm old. I'm not blind. And I'm not asking your business. I'm just telling you I noticed, so you know your ghost isn't as invisible as you think. James let out a slow breath. It's not what you think. It's never what I think. That's what makes it interesting. Her face softened. Is she in trouble, this woman? Bad trouble, the kind that follows people home. Mrs. Delgado nodded slowly and took Sophie's hand. Then you do what you do, and you let me watch this one a little extra this week, and you don't worry about anybody looking in your windows on my street. I've buried a husband and outlived 2 nosy neighbors. Nobody watches this block closer than me. She fixed him with a look. You're a good man, James. Whatever she's running from, she picked the right door. I hope so, ma'am. I don't hope. I know. Now go. And James? She caught his sleeve. Those walls of yours, the high ones. A knowing look. Somebody finally climbed one, didn't they? James didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either, and Mrs. Delgado smiled to herself as she closed the door. Back at the house, James found Natalie at the kitchen table with her phone in her hands, staring at it like it was a live grenade. Don't turn it on, he said immediately. I haven't, but there are... She swallowed. I turned it on for 30 seconds this morning while you were out. I know I shouldn't have. There are 41 missed calls, James, from him and 11 texts, and they start out worried and they change. Change how? She turned the phone around and showed him and James read them, and his face went hard. The early ones were exactly what you'd expect a worried fiancé to send. Where are you? Please call me. I'm frightened, Natalie. And then slowly the texts changed shape. This isn't like you. People are starting to ask questions. You know how this looks. And then the board is concerned. I'm doing everything I can to manage the narrative, but you're not making it easy. Come home, and we'll fix this together. And the last one sent an hour ago, Natalie. I know you're upset, but if you don't come home today, I'm going to have no choice but to tell people I'm worried about your safety, about your state of mind. I don't want to do that. Please don't make me. You see it, James said. It wasn't a question. See what? Read that last one again, out loud, slow. She did. Now tell me what he's actually saying. Underneath. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then in a voice gone cold with understanding, she said, He's saying that if I don't come back and let him control me, he's going to use my disappearance as proof that I'm unstable. He's threatening me, but he's writing it so that if anyone ever read it, it looks like concern. That's exactly what he's doing. James set the phone down. And that right there is the first mistake he's made, because he put it in writing. How is that a mistake? It just looks like a worried fiancé. It looks like a worried fiancé to a stranger reading it cold, James said. But we're not going to read it cold. We're going to read it next to everything else. Next to the shell company, next to the contracts, next to the fabricated concerns he managed with the board before you ever did anything to concern them. He tapped the table. One text that says, "I'm worried about you," means nothing. But a pattern, a man who was building a case that his fiancée was unstable weeks before she disappeared, who was moving money out of her company at the same time, who watched her drown and performed for a crowd that's not a worried fiancé anymore. That's a paper trail. And paper trails are how you drown a story, Natalie. I told you last night. Facts stacked high enough that the story underneath can't breathe. For the first time, Natalie looked at him not with gratitude, not with fear, but with something sharper. Calculation of her own. The businesswoman her father had spent a lifetime insisting didn't exist. "Then we need more paper," she said. "Now you're talking like a sailor." James almost smiled. "Tell me everything you have. Every document, every account, every place you've got proof, even the stuff you think is too small to matter. Especially that stuff. We're going to build the story so big and so true he can't fight it. And the first thing we need is a lawyer. Not one of his, one of yours. Somebody he doesn't know exists and can't reach." Natalie's face fell. "That's the problem. Every lawyer I know is somebody Victor knows too. Yeah, I figured." James pulled out his own phone. "So we don't use anybody you know. I've got a friend. JAG officer, the one who saved me in my custody case, retired out 2 years ago and went into private practice. Rachel Okonkwo. She is the single most terrifying human being I have ever met in a courtroom, and Victor Langford has never heard her name in his life." Rachel Okonkwo came to the house that afternoon, and she filled the room the second she walked in. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, a legal pad already in her hand. "James Carter," she said. "Last time I saw you, you were crying in my office over a 3-year-old. How's the kid?" "6 now, teaching people to make pancakes." "Good. Kids should teach, now." She turned to Natalie, and her whole manner shifted, still sharp but gentler. "Ms. Brooks, James gave me the outline over the phone. Before we start, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to make you feel better. James does the feelings. I do the facts. I'm going to ask you hard questions, and some of them are going to feel like accusations, and they're not. They're the questions Victor's lawyers will ask, and I'd rather you hear them from me first in this kitchen than from them in a deposition. Can you handle that?" Natalie sat up straighter. "Yes." "Good answer. Most people say I think so. You said yes." Rachel sat. "Then let's begin. The night you went in the water. Walk me through it. And Ms. Brooks, do not tell me he pushed you." Natalie blinked. "But I know you think he might have. James told me. And here's why you're never going to say it. You don't know he did. You said so yourself. And the instant you claim something you can't prove, you hand Victor the exact weapon he's building, a woman making wild, unprovable accusations. His whole strategy depends on you being the hysterical one, so we don't give it to him. We never claim more than we can prove. We claim less than we can prove, and we let the evidence do the accusing for us. Do you understand?" James watched Natalie absorb this, and he saw the moment it landed the same lesson he'd tried to give her at 1 in the morning, now sharpened into a blade by a woman who'd used it to win 100 times. "I understand," Natalie said. "I fell. He watched. That's all I'll say. That's all you'll say, and it's devastating because it's true, and it's provable, and it's worse than an accusation. An accusation invites argument. He watched me drown and didn't move. There's nothing to argue. Either he moved or he didn't, and 50 witnesses saw that he didn't until it was safe for his reputation." Rachel made a note. "Good, we understand each other. Now, the financial documents, the shell company. Tell me everything and don't leave anything out because you think it's boring. Boring is where cases are won." For the next 3 hours they built. Natalie talked until her voice went hoarse. James took notes on everything, a second record in case anything happened to Rachel's. Rachel pulled thread after thread, and every time Natalie said, "And this probably doesn't matter, but," Rachel would say, "Let me decide what matters." And half the time it turned out to matter enormously. The contract with the doctored numbers. The shell company. The dates, the crucial dates, showing that Victor had begun laying groundwork to question Natalie's competence before her father was even in the ground. The rushed wedding timeline. The bank records Natalie had quietly photographed. The board members Victor had cultivated. And threaded through all of it, the pattern of a man systematically isolating a woman from everyone who might have helped her see what was happening. "He was good," Rachel said, finally sitting back. "I'll give him that. This is a genuinely good operation. Patient, layered. If you hadn't looked at that one contract on a hunch, he'd have had you married and declared incompetent inside a year, and you'd never have known what hit you." She capped her pen. "But he made 3 mistakes, and they're going to end him." "3, Natalie said. Rachel held up a finger. 1. He put threats in writing dressed up as concern. Cute, but writing is writing. A second finger. 2. He started building the unstable Natalie narrative on a paper trail with dates on it, and those dates prove premeditation because you can't be worried about instability that hasn't happened yet unless you're planning to manufacture it. A third finger. And 3, the big one, the one he'll never see coming. She nodded at James. He watched 50 witnesses see a stranger jump in and save you while he stood there. He built his entire narrative on the idea that no one would ever question him. And now there's a decorated Navy officer with an unimpeachable reputation who was there, who has nothing to gain, who the board and the press already love, and who is going to stand in a room and say, "I didn't know who she was, I just knew she was drowning." Rachel smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Victor built a story that only works if everyone stays quiet. And he made the mistake of leaving a witness who doesn't know how to stay quiet. James shifted. "I'm not looking to be the story here." "I know you're not," Rachel said. "That's exactly why you're going to be so effective. Nobody believes the man who wants the spotlight. Everybody believes the man who clearly wishes he were anywhere else." She stood gathering her pad. "Give me a week. I need to verify the financials independently, subpoena a couple of things, and quietly find out which board members are Victor's and which are just scared. When I walk into that boardroom, I want to already know how the vote goes before anybody casts it." "And until then," Natalie asked, "until then you stay invisible. You don't call him. You don't call anyone. If he can't find you, he can't control the story. And right now the story is the only weapon he has." Rachel paused at the door. "One more thing, Ms. Brooks, and I mean this professionally. The version of you that walked out of that boardroom for the last time, the quiet one, the one who said, 'Okay to everything, she's not going to win this.' When we walk in there, I need the woman who looked at a doctored contract and thought, 'That's wrong, and I'm going to prove it.' Can you be her?" Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been her the whole time. I just let too many people tell me I wasn't." "Then we're going to be fine," Rachel said, and left. Good. The week that followed was the strangest of James Carter's life. By day he went to the base and did his job, and nobody there had any idea that a fugitive heiress was living in his daughter's reading nook. By evening he came home to a house that had impossibly started to feel full again. Sophie chattering, Natalie learning to cook one dish at a time, the 3 of them at a dinner table that hadn't seated 3 people since Claire died. He noticed it happening, and he didn't stop it, and that scared him more than Victor Langford ever could. "You're doing the staring thing again," Sophie announced one evening. But at Natalie this time. James nearly dropped his fork. "Eat your peas." "You were, though." Peas. Now. Natalie was very carefully not looking at either of them, and the tips of her ears had gone pink, and James thought, "This is dangerous. This is not the danger I signed up for. This is worse." And he changed the subject. But later, after Sophie was in bed, Natalie found him on the back step, where he'd gone to be alone with the cold and the dark and the thing he was refusing to look at directly. "She's an observant kid," Natalie said, sitting down beside him. "Not too close, but not far. Too observant. It's a problem." James stared out at the dark. "Natalie, I have to say something, and I need to say it plain because I don't know how to do it any other way." "Okay, whatever's—" He stopped, started again. "You came to me because you were drowning, both times. in the harbor, and then at my door. And when you pull somebody out of the water, they'll feel things toward you that aren't real exactly. They're gratitude wearing a different coat. And I will not, his jaw worked. I will not be another man who took advantage of a woman at the lowest moment of her life when she had nowhere else to go. Victor did that. I won't. So whatever this is starting to feel like in this house, I need us both to be very careful with it, because you're not free right now. You're not standing on solid ground. And I've got a daughter who's already deciding you belong at that table. And if this goes wrong, James. If this goes wrong, she's the one who breaks, and I can't. James? Natalie put her hand on his arm and he went silent. I need you to hear something, and then you can go back to being noble about it. You're right about the gratitude. You're right that I'm not on solid ground. And you're right to protect Sophie. God, you're always right about Sophie. It's honestly a little annoying. A small wet laugh. But you're wrong about one thing. You think I can't tell the difference between gratitude and something else. I've spent 34 years having every feeling I've ever had explained back to me by someone who knew better. My father, Victor. You're just tired, Natalie. You're just anxious. You don't really feel that. Her hand tightened on his arm. So please don't be one more person who tells me I don't know my own heart. Even if you're doing it to be kind. Especially if you're doing it to be kind. James turned to look at her. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. You're right that this isn't the time, and I'm not free, and there's a war to fight first. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just asking you not to decide for me what I do and don't feel. That's all. That's the one thing I need from anybody ever again for the rest of my life. Let me feel my own feelings. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Deal, James said finally quietly. Deal. After, he said. When you're free. When you're standing on your own ground, and you don't need anybody to pull you out of anything. If it's still there, then we'll look at it then. After, Natalie agreed. And they sat on the cold step in the dark, not touching except for her hand on his arm, and it was the most terrifying and the most alive James had felt in 3 years. The peace lasted 4 more days. On the 5th, it broke. James was at the base when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't open it. He wished later that he hadn't. It was a photo. Taken from a car through his own front window at an angle only possible from the street. Blurry but unmistakable Natalie standing in his kitchen, her face lit by the light over the stove. Underneath the photo, 4 words, I found her sailor. James's blood went cold and then hot, and then very, very still, the stillness that came over him in the water in combat in the courtroom. The stillness that meant the thinking part of his brain had taken full control and locked everything else out. He called home. Natalie answered on the first ring, breathless. James, are the doors locked? Yes. Is Sophie there, or at Mrs. Delgado's? Mrs. Delgado's, she's at Mrs. Delgado's. James, what's... Good. Listen to me. Do not open the door for anyone, not anyone. I don't care who they say they are. Go into the reading nook, lock that door too, and stay there. I'm 40 minutes out. I'm leaving now. Do you understand me? He found me, didn't he? He found me. Natalie, do you understand me? Yes. Say it back. Don't open the door for anyone. Reading nook. Lock it. Wait for you. Her voice was shaking, but it held. James, what about Sophie? I'm calling Mrs. Delgado right now. Sophie doesn't leave that house till I get her myself. Go, now. He hung up and called Mrs. Delgado, who answered with her usual dryness that turned to steel the moment she heard his voice. Say the word James. Keep Sophie inside. Bolt the door. If anybody comes to the house who isn't me, anybody, you call the police, and you say the words threatening a child, and you don't open that door for God himself. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She's safe with me. You know that. Now go do what you have to do. James was already in his truck. He called Rachel on the drive, one hand on the wheel doing 80. Okonkwo. He found her. He's got a photo through my window, sent it to my phone. I found her sailor. There was a pause on the line, and when Rachel spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened into something James had only heard once before, the day she'd walked into his custody hearing and dismantled the other side. Okay, listen to me carefully, James, because how you handle the next 24 hours decides everything. First, is anyone in danger right now? Natalie's locked down at my house. Sophie's locked down at the Sitters. I'm on my way to Natalie. Then nobody's in danger because Victor Langford is a coward who works through paper and reputation, not through his hands. If he wanted to hurt her physically, he had his chance on that pier. That's not his game. His game is fear. That text isn't a threat of violence. It's a threat of exposure. He wants you both scared enough to make a mistake. It's working on the scared part. Good. Scared is fine. Scared keeps you sharp. Reckless is what kills you. So here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to call him back. You're not going to threaten him. You're not going to do anything that a man that careful could record and use to make you the aggressor. He'd love that. A big Navy officer threatening the poor concerned fiancé, he'd frame you in a heartbeat. Then what do? You screenshot that text. You note the time. You add it to the pile. James could hear her almost smiling. Because he just made his fourth mistake, and it's the worst one yet. He just admitted in writing on your phone that he's been surveilling a private residence to locate a woman who left him. A woman he claims he's worried about, but worried men call the police James. They don't hire people to photograph her through windows and then send taunting texts to the man protecting her. He just handed us the difference between a concerned fiancé and a stalker, and he handed it to us in writing. James's grip on the wheel loosened just slightly. He thinks he's winning. He thinks fear is winning. He's used to fear working. Every person in Natalie's life folded the second he applied pressure. Her father's board, her friends, Natalie herself. He has never in his life met someone who gets more dangerous when you threaten what they're protecting. A beat. He's about to. Go get her, James. Keep both your girls safe. And then call me tonight because I've verified the financials. And it's worse for Victor than we hoped, which means it's time to stop hiding and start moving. James hung up. He drove the rest of the way in that cold, clear stillness, and somewhere in it, the fear burned off entirely, and left only resolve. He'd spent 3 years telling himself his fighting days were behind him, that all he had left was survival, one careful step across cracking ice. He'd been wrong. Victor Langford had made one fundamental error, the same one every predator eventually makes. He'd looked at James Carter and seen a lonely widower, a lonely soldier, an easy man to frighten. He hadn't seen the father. He hadn't understood that the thing he was threatening the woman in that house, the child at the Sitters, the fragile, impossible new thing growing at that dinner table, was the exact thing James Carter would walk back into freezing black water 100 times over to protect. He pulled into his driveway. The house was dark and locked exactly as it should be. He got out, scanned the street once the car was gone. Of course it was. Victor was too careful to still be sitting there, and he went to his own front door and knocked the pattern he'd told Natalie to listen for. The lock turned. The door opened. And Natalie stood there, pale but steady, and the first thing she said was, not, "I'm scared," and not, "What do we do?" The first thing she said was, "Is Sophie safe?" And James looked at this woman who 12 days ago he'd pulled half dead out of the ocean, who'd arrived at his door with nothing but fear, who was now in the worst moment of the whole ordeal, asking first about his daughter, and he knew the answer to the question he'd told them both they'd wait until after to ask. "She's safe," he said. "You're safe. Nobody's taking anything from this house." He stepped inside and bolted the door behind him. "Now," he said, "Rachel's got the financials. He knows where you are. There's no more hiding." He looked at her, and the last of the frightened man he'd been for 3 years was gone from his face, replaced by something she hadn't seen before, the commander fully present, ready for the fight. So we stop running, and we start hunting. Part 4. Rachel came that night after Sophie was asleep, and she spread everything across the kitchen table like a general laying out a battle map. "It's worse than we thought," she said, "which for us means better." She tapped a stack of bank records. The money Victor's been moving isn't just skimming, it's structured, layered through 3 shell entities timed to look like legitimate operating expenses. Somebody with real expertise built this. Which tells me 2 things. 1, he's been planning it far longer than 8 months, and 2, he didn't build it alone. Who helped him? Natalie asked. That's the question I spent all week on. Rachel pulled out a single sheet of paper and set it in the center of the table, like she was laying down a winning card. The psychological evaluation. The one that says you're unstable, unfit to manage the company. It's signed by a Dr. Alan Reyes. Board-certified, respectable-looking credentials, exactly the kind of authority a board would defer to without question. I've never met him, Natalie said. I've never even been evaluated. How can there be a report? Because it's fabricated, Rachel said. And here's how I know. She laid down a second sheet. Dr. Reyes's practice received 4 payments over the last 5 months, from one of Victor's shell companies, the same shell company moving money out of Brooks Maritime. She looked up. Ms. Brooks, the man who declared you mentally unfit, was being paid by the man who wanted your company. He never evaluated you. He wrote a report to order, and he got paid for it out of money stolen from you. The kitchen was silent. That's... Natalie's voice failed. She tried again. That's the thing that's been making me feel insane. That report. Every time I stood up for myself, someone would say, but the evaluation. And I'd start to think maybe they were right. Maybe I really was. You were never anything, Rachel said flatly. There is no evaluation. There's a receipt. A man was paid to write down a lie about a woman he never met, so another man could steal her father's company. That's not a medical opinion, Ms. Brooks. That's a crime. Several of them. And it means the entire foundation of Victor's story. The thing that made the board doubt you, the thing that made you doubt you, was purchased with stolen money. James had gone very still. That's the whole thing, he said quietly. That's the exact move. Take a true woman, buy a false document, and use the false document to make everyone, including her, rearrange all the true things into a story that isn't real. He looked at Natalie. I told you the most dangerous thing in the world is the truth bent. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing is a lie with a doctor's signature on it, because now it's not just bent truth. It's got authority behind it. Had, Rachel corrected. Past tense. Because a bought signature is worthless the second you can show the receipt. And I have the receipt. She squared the papers. Here's where we are. I have the financial trail. I have the shell companies. I have the doctor's payments. I have the dates that prove premeditation. I have Victor's texts to Natalie dressed as concern, but reading like coercion. And I have that photo he sent you, James, which by itself establishes surveillance of a private residence. She folded her hands. Individually, any one of these has an explanation. A good lawyer could wave any single piece away. But together it's a story so big he can't fight it, James said. Facts stacked too high to breathe under. Together, it's a story so big he can't fight it, Rachel agreed. The question is how we tell it, and to whom, and when. They argued about that for an hour. Rachel wanted to go straight to the authorities, file the fraud complaint, let the machinery grind, keep Natalie protected, and let the law take Victor apart over months. James understood the logic. He didn't like it. Months, he said. You're talking about months, during which Victor is still on the board, still controlling the narrative, still telling everyone Natalie's unstable, and now she's run off, which just proves his point. During which my daughter and this woman live behind bolted doors, because a man with money is somewhere out there, patient waiting. You want to fight this slow and safe and legal, Rachel, and I respect that. But slow and safe is exactly the ground Victor's strongest on. He's got more money than us. He can outlast us. He can drag out months into years and bleed Natalie dry in legal fees, and let the story that she's crazy calcify into fact while the courts move at the speed of courts. And your alternative, Rachel said. We hit him where he can't outlast us, where it's fast and public and there's no appeal. James leaned forward. The board meeting. The quarterly board meeting. It's in 9 days, Natalie told me. Every board member in one room. That's the room where Victor plans to finish it, where he plans to formalize control, while Natalie's conveniently missing and unwell. He tapped the table. So we don't let it be that room. We make it our room. We walk in with everything. The financials, the receipts, the doctor, all of it laid out in front of the exact people Victor's been lying to. And we make them choose in real time in front of each other with the evidence on the table. Do you side with the man holding stolen money or the woman holding the proof? That's theater, Rachel said. I don't do theater. Theater loses cases. It's not theater, it's venue, James said. You taught me that, in my custody case. You said you're fighting this like a sailor fight it like they're fighting it. Victor chose his battlefield, the boardroom, the room where reputation is currency. Fine. Let's beat him on the field he chose in front of the people he was counting on. Because the second those board members see the receipt for that psych evaluation, Rachel, the second they understand they've been played, that a man used their own trust to steal from a woman whose father, they all knew, they're not going to want to be anywhere near Victor Langford. Powerful people don't punish you for being a criminal. They punish you for making them look like fools. And Victor made every one of them a fool. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly a smile spread across her face, the terrifying one. You've gotten smarter since I saw you cry in my office, she said. I had a good lawyer. You had a great lawyer. She pulled the papers toward her, already resorting them into a new order. A presentation order, an ambush order. Fine, we do it your way, the boardroom, but we do it my way inside your way, which means every single claim we make is bulletproof before we walk in. We make no accusation. We can't prove with paper on the table, and Natalie... She turned. You have to be the one who says it. Not me, not James. You. This only works if the woman Victor said was too broken to speak for herself, walks into that room and speaks for herself calmly with receipts. Can you do that? Natalie had been silent through the whole argument, listening, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Now she set the cup down. For 8 months, she said quietly, I've let other people decide what room I'm allowed to be in, whether I get to speak, what I'm capable of. She looked up, and her eyes were steady. Victor thinks I'm going to be missing from that meeting. Sick, unstable, hidden away. A small, hard smile. I'm going to walk in the front door, and I'm going to sit in my father's chair, and I'm going to tell them the truth, all of it, with the receipts on the table. She looked at James. Yes, I can do that. Then we've got 9 days, Rachel said. Let's not waste them. Sung. The 9 days were the hardest and the best of James's life, tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them. Hardest because the pressure never let up. Victor sent 2 more texts. No photos this time, just words, always words dressed as worry. The board meets soon, Natalie. It would look so much better if you came in on your own. I can still help you. And once, chillingly. Tell the sailor. I looked into his record. Interesting reading. A custody battle. A man declared emotionally compromised by a court. I wonder how his commanding officers would feel about the company he's keeping. James read that one twice and set the phone down very carefully. He's threatening your career, Natalie said, watching his face. Isn't he? And Sophie. He's threatening to drag the custody thing back up. Let him, James said. James. No, listen to me. I've thought about this. Really thought about it the way I think about everything now, because I've got too much to lose to be sloppy. He turned to her. Here's what Victor doesn't understand, because men like him never do. He thinks that record is a weapon against me. The custody battle. The emotionally compromised thing. He thinks it's my shame, my weak spot, the thing I'll fold to protect. James shook his head slowly. But I already lived through the worst version of that. I already sat in a courtroom and heard a stranger read my grief back to me as evidence I was unfit. I already almost lost my daughter to a bent story. And I won. So there is nothing Victor can dig up about that fight that I haven't already survived. He's threatening me with a war I already fought and won. All he's doing is reminding me I know exactly how to fight it." Natalie looked at him with something close to awe. "You're not afraid of him at all anymore." "I'm afraid of losing you and Sophie," James said before he could stop himself. "That's the only fear I've got left. Victor Langford's just a man with money and a bought signature. I've faced worse in colder water." He caught what he'd said and didn't take it back. "But him, no. I'm not afraid of him." That was the best part of those 9 days buried inside the hardest. The thing at the dinner table kept growing quietly in the spaces between the war. Sophie stopped calling her the lady and started calling her Natalie, and then one night, half asleep, called her something else entirely. Asked James sleepily, "Is Natalie going to stay after the bad man goes away?" And James had said, "We'll see, baby." And Natalie had heard it, and neither of them had trusted themselves to speak. On the 7th night, Natalie found James on the back step again. "I can't sleep," she said, sitting down. "Neither can I." 2 days. 2 days. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if it doesn't work, James? What if I walk in there and my hands are shaking, and my voice cracks, and every single one of them looks at me the way they always have, the fragile little Brooks girl who got in over her head? What if Victor's right? What if the second I'm in that room, I turn back into the person who says okay to everything?" James turned to look at her. "You want to know how I got through my custody hearing," he said. "The morning I had to testify. How? I was terrified. Same as you. I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot, and I could not make myself go in, because I was so scared I was going to freeze up on that stand and lose Sophie forever. And Rachel came out and found me, and she didn't tell me to be brave. She said something I've never forgotten." He looked out at the dark. "She said, you don't have to walk in there and be strong. You just have to walk in there and tell the truth. The strength is in the truth, not in you. You just carry it through the door." Natalie was very still. "You're not going to walk into that boardroom and be strong, Natalie," James said gently. "You might shake. Your voice might crack. That's fine. That's human. You don't have to be strong. You just have to carry the truth through the door and set it on the table. And the truth is heavy enough to crush Victor Langford all by itself. You're not the weapon. The truth is the weapon. You're just the one brave enough to carry it into the room." He held her eyes. "And I'll be right there. 2 feet away, the whole time. If your voice cracks, you look at me, and I'll be looking back, and you keep going. Deal?" Natalie's eyes filled. "Deal," she whispered. And then, because it was 2 nights before the end, and neither of them could pretend anymore, she leaned her head against his shoulder, and James let her, and they sat like that in the cold and the dark, not saying anything. 2 people who'd both been pulled out of deep water, learning what it felt like to finally stand on solid ground. "After," Natalie said softly. "After," James agreed. But they both knew now that after was real, that it was coming, that there was going to be an after at all. The morning of the board meeting, James put on his dress uniform. Natalie watched him in the mirror adjusting the last of it, and she said, "You didn't have to wear that." "Yeah, I did," James said. "Not for me, for the room. Rachel taught me every room speaks a language, and you speak it back to them. Victor's going to walk in there in a $10,000 suit speaking money, so I'm going to walk in speaking service, speaking the thing they can't buy and can't fake." He straightened the jacket. "They're going to look at me, and they're not going to see a lonely widower or a man they can frame. They're going to see the officer from the harbor, the one on the news, the one who jumped. That's the man they trust before I open my mouth. And that's the man Victor has to try to tear down in front of everyone, a decorated officer who saved a drowning woman. Let him try. He'll look like exactly what he is." Natalie turned from the mirror. She was wearing a suit of her own sharp dark, her father's company in the cut of it. "How do I look?" she asked. James looked at her for a long moment. "Like the owner of the company," he said. "Like you always were." They dropped Sophie at Mrs. Delgado's on the way. The old woman met them at the door, took one look at the 2 of them in their armor, and understood everything. "Today's the day," she said. "Today's the day, ma'am." Mrs. Delgado looked at Natalie. "You, come here." Natalie stepped closer, uncertain. The old woman took her face in both weathered hands. "I've watched that man mourn for 3 years behind those curtains. I watched him build walls so high I thought nobody'd ever get over them. And you did. So whatever's waiting for you in that room today, you go in there and you win, because you've got something to come home to now, and so does he." She patted Natalie's cheek. "Both of you. Come home. I'll have the girl fed, and the porch light on." Natalie couldn't speak. She just nodded. "Go," Mrs. Delgado said. "And James?" He turned. "Your Claire would be proud of you. Not for saving the woman, for finally letting somebody save you back." James's jaw worked. He nodded once tightly, and they went. The Brooks Maritime boardroom was on the top floor, all glass and long tables, and the particular hush of a place where large amounts of money change hands quietly. Rachel met them in the lobby, calm as still water. "Board's all here," she said. 12 members. I've made my calls. Here's the count. 4 are victors bought or scared. 3 are solidly on your father's memory, which means yours. And 5 are undecided, which means 5 are watching to see which way the wind blows before they commit. Those 5 are who we're talking to. Not Victor. Not the loyalists. The 5 who'll go wherever the power is. She looked at Natalie. By the end of this meeting, they need to be certain the power is you. Not because you shouted. Because you were the only one in the room holding the truth. "Ready, ready," Natalie said. "Is he in there?" James asked. "He's in there, head of the table. In your father's chair, actually, Ms. Brooks. He moved the nameplate." Rachel's smile was thin. "He thinks this is a coronation. He has no idea you're even in the building. He's told the board you're too unwell to attend and that he'll be, quote, managing your interests in your absence." She gathered her folders. "Let's go correct the record." They walked to the double doors. James put his hand on Natalie's arm one last time. "You carry the truth through the door," he said quietly. "That's all. I've got the rest. Rachel's got the rest. You just carry it in." Natalie took a breath, and then she opened the doors herself. The room turned. 12 faces looked up from the long table, and for one frozen second, nobody moved, and James watched it happen, watched the exact thing Rachel had promised. The 4 loyalists went pale. The 3 allies sat up, and the 5 undecided leaned forward, suddenly very interested because a story had just walked into the room. And at the head of the table, in a dead man's chair, Victor Langford's face did something remarkable. For half a second, just half the mask slipped completely, and pure cold fury flashed across his features. James saw it. Several board members saw it. And then the mask came back smooth and warm and concerned, and Victor rose with a gentleness that would have fooled anyone who hadn't seen what was underneath it 2 seconds before. "Natalie," he said, and his voice was all worry. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be here. You're not well. Everyone—" He turned to the board. "I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of. She's not herself. Someone should call." "Sit down, Victor." Natalie's voice didn't shake. The room went silent. "I said sit down. You're in my father's chair. You even moved his nameplate." She walked to the table, steady, unhurried, James 2 feet behind her, exactly as promised. "I'm going to give it back to him, and then I'm going to tell these people the truth, all of it. And when I'm done, they're going to decide who they believe. So sit down." For a moment, Victor didn't move. James watched him calculate, watched the man run the odds the way he ran everything, and watched him decide that the concerned fiancé play was still his best one. "She's unwell," Victor said to the board, spreading his hands, sitting slowly. "You can all see it. This is precisely the erratic behavior Dr. Reyes documented. The delusions, the paranoia. It breaks my heart. Natalie, please let me take you home." "Dr. Reyes," Rachel said, stepping forward and setting a single sheet of paper on the table, "never met Natalie Brooks." The room shifted. "Who are you?" Victor said. "Rachel Okonkwo, Ms. Brooks's attorney." She slid the paper down the table. That's a record of 4 payments made to Dr. Alan Reyes over the past 5 months, from an entity called Meridian Coastal Holdings. Would anyone at this table like to guess who controls Meridian Coastal Holdings? She let the silence stretch. It's Victor. The man who declared Natalie mentally unfit was paid to do it with money moved out of this company, out of your shareholders' funds, out of the legacy of the man whose chair Victor is sitting in. The 4 loyalists had stopped looking at Victor. The 5 undecided were staring at the paper being passed hand to hand down the table, and James watched the wind change direction in real time, exactly as Rachel had said it would. This is... Victor's voice had an edge now, the first crack. This is fabricated. This woman is a hired gun. She's manufactured. They're bank records, Victor, Natalie said quietly. From your own shell company. You can't manufacture a wire transfer. It either happened or it didn't. And it happened. 4 times. You have no idea what you're... I have every idea. And now Natalie's voice did rise not into hysteria, but into something none of them had heard from her before command. I have every idea, Victor, because I'm the one who found it. Not my lawyer, not anyone. Me. The woman you told everyone was too broken to read a contract. I read the contract. I found the shell company. I traced the money. I built the whole file sitting in a stranger's house because you'd made sure I had nowhere else to go. She set her own folder on the table and opened it. So let me tell these people what actually happened. From the beginning. And then they can decide whether I sound unwell. And she told them. She told it calmly, the way Rachel had drilled her, the way James had promised her she could. She told them about the coffee and the 100 small okays. About the friends peeled away the meetings she was talked out of the slow closing of the cage. About her father's death and the sudden rush to marry. About the contract that didn't sit right and the shell company underneath it. About the fabricated evaluation. About the dates, the terrible dates, proving Victor had begun building the unstable Natalie story weeks before her father was even buried. Her voice cracked once. In the middle, talking about the friends she'd lost. And James was 2 feet away, and she looked at him, and he was looking back steady as stone, and she found the next word and kept going. And then she told them about the harbor. I confronted him that night, she said. On the pier. I told him I knew everything, and I fell into the water. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. I'm not going to tell you he pushed me. I don't know if he did. It was dark, and it was fast, and I honestly can't be sure, so I won't claim it. A pause. But I can tell you what I saw when I came up. I saw the man I was engaged to standing at the edge of that pier, looking down at me while I drowned. Not moving, not reaching, just watching. For long enough that I understood in the water that he was deciding whether to save me at all. Her voice was steel now. And then he called for help. Loudly. So there'd be witnesses to that part. But there were no witnesses to the part where he watched me go under and did the math. The room was dead silent. You know who didn't do the math? Natalie said, and she turned and she looked at James. Him, a stranger, Commander James Carter. He didn't know my name. He didn't know I owned this company, or that I was worth a dime. He heard a person drowning, and he jumped into 48-degree water in his uniform, and he pulled me out with his own hands and did CPR until I breathed again. 50 wealthy, powerful people stood on that pier and calculated. One man jumped. She looked back at the board. I'll let you decide which kind of man you want running this company. The one who watched me drown and performed for the crowd. Or the one who's standing behind me right now, who's got nothing to gain, who's here for one reason only. Every eye in the room turned to James, and Victor, desperate now cornered, played his last card, the one James had known was coming. That man, Victor said, pointing, his voice rising, is not the hero you think he is. I looked into him. Commander Carter has a history, a custody battle, a court that found him, and I quote, emotionally compromised, a widower, lonely, vulnerable, who latched onto a wealthy woman the moment she... That's true, James said. The room stopped. James stepped forward, calm, his dress uniform catching the light, and he spoke to the board directly for the first time. Every word of that is true, he said. 3 years ago, my wife died without warning, and I was so broken by it that when her sister petitioned for custody of my daughter, a court-appointed evaluator wrote that I was emotionally compromised, and I was. My wife had just died. Of course I was. He let that sit. A very good lawyer took every true human grieving thing about me and arranged it into a story that I was unfit to raise my own child. And for a while people believed it, because a bent truth with an official signature on it is the most dangerous thing in the world. He looked very deliberately at the paper still sitting on the table, the receipt for Dr. Reyes. I imagine some of you are starting to recognize the technique. Nobody moved. I fought that story, James went on. Not by pretending the facts weren't true, but by burying them under more truth than they could hold. And I won. I kept my daughter. So when Victor Langford threatens to drag that fight back into the light to discredit me, he turned and looked directly at Victor. All he's doing is reminding everyone in this room that he's an expert at exactly one thing, taking a decent person's worst moment and weaponizing it. He did it to me from a distance, digging through my records. He did it to Natalie up close for 8 months with a bought doctor and stolen money. James's voice never rose. It didn't have to. That's not a man protecting anyone. That's a man's whole method laid out on this table in front of you. And I didn't know a single thing about any of it when I jumped in that water. I didn't know her name. I only knew somebody was drowning. And for the first time since the doors had opened, Victor Langford had no answer at all. The silence stretched. And then one of the 5, a gray-haired woman who'd known Natalie's father for 30 years, slid the receipt for Dr. Reyes back down the table toward Victor and said in a voice like a closing door, I think you should explain these payments, Victor, right now, to all of us. And James watched the wind finish changing, and watched a man who'd built his entire life on people being too afraid to check behind the shape of him finally completely run out of room. Part 5. Victor Langford never did explain those payments. He tried. For about 90 seconds he tried his voice, climbing his careful calm, cracking apart in front of the very people he'd spent years impressing. He talked about consulting fees and legitimate arrangements, and a lawyer twisting innocent transactions into something sinister. But James watched the room while Victor talked, and he understood that it was already over, because not one person at that table was looking at Victor with anything but the cold contempt of people who have just realized they were made into fools. Consulting fees, the gray-haired woman repeated flatly. You paid a psychiatrist to consult on a woman he never examined, and the consultation produced a document declaring her unfit to run the company you would then control. Do you hear yourself, Victor? Margaret, you've known me for... I knew your reputation, she said. I'm learning the man. She turned to Rachel. Ms. Okonkwo, what are our obligations here legally if crimes have been committed against this company? I assume this board has a duty to act. You have several duties, Rachel said smoothly, and James almost admired how she'd waited for a board member to ask instead of pushing it herself, letting them feel it was their idea. You have a fiduciary duty to the company that's been defrauded. You have an obligation to report financial crimes you've been made aware of. And you have the authority right now in this meeting with quorum present to remove Mr. Langford from any position of control pending investigation. She set a clean document on the table. I took the liberty of preparing the resolution. You'd only need to vote. Victor stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the glass wall. This is a coup, he said, and the mask was entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was ugly. This is a coup orchestrated by an unstable woman and a broke sailor with a grudge and a lawyer they dug up from... Sit down, Victor. It was Natalie. Quiet again. Steady again. You've said that word 3 times now. Unstable. You've been saying it for 8 months, and I want you to look around this room and notice that it stopped working. She stepped toward him, and James moved with her 2 feet behind, and Victor's eyes flicked to James and then away. That's the thing you never understood. You didn't build a cage out of iron. You built it out of one word repeated until I believed it. And the second somebody handed me the truth and stood beside me while I said it out loud. She gestured at the room, at James, at Rachel. The word lost all its power. It was never real. It was just loud. Natalie. The vote, please. Natalie said, turning to the board and away from him, and the turning away was worse than any shout could have been. Let's take the vote. They took the vote. 12 hands. James counted them the way he counted everything now. The 3 allies went up first immediately. Then the 5 undecided, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each one. A small betrayal of the man who'd counted on their silence. And then worst of all for Victor, 2 of his own 4 loyalists raised their hands too, because loyalty bought with fear evaporates the instant the fearful thing looks weaker than the alternative, and Victor Langford had just been revealed as the weaker thing in front of everyone. 10-2. Victor Langford was removed from every position he held at Brooks Maritime, effective immediately pending a criminal investigation that Rachel would make certain happened. You'll regret this, Victor said, gathering nothing because there was nothing to gather, his hands empty in a room that was no longer his. All of you have no idea what you've... Victor. James spoke for the last time and his voice was quiet, and it carried to every corner of that glass room. You dug into my worst moment to try to break me. You paid a man to lie about her. You watched her drown and timed your rescue for the cameras. And in 12 days, a stranger you wrote off as nobody, and a woman you swore was too broken to fight, took apart everything you spent years building. He didn't gloat. He wasn't the type. He just said plainly the truest thing in the room. You mistook quiet for weak. It's the most expensive mistake a man like you can make. Now the door's behind you. Victor looked at him for a long moment, and then because there was nothing else to do, because the room had closed against him completely, because the shape of the powerful man had finally been shown to have nothing behind it, he left. Security walked him out. The double doors that Natalie had opened swung shut behind him, and he was gone, and the empire he'd tried to steal through a bought signature and a whispered word did not fall to him. It stayed exactly where it belonged.
Now come.
The room let out a collective breath. Margaret, the gray-haired woman, was the first to stand. She walked around the long table to Natalie, and for a moment, the 2 women just looked at each other. Your father, Margaret said, was my friend for 30 years. And I let that man convince me you weren't ready. I looked at you these last months, and I saw what he told me to see. Her voice was rough. I'm ashamed of that, Natalie. You deserved better from all of us, and you got it from a stranger in a Navy uniform instead. That's on us, not on you. You're here now, Natalie said. That's what matters. He counted on all of you staying quiet. You didn't. We almost did, Margaret said honestly. Don't give us more credit than we've earned. We came around when the paper was on the table. You'd have won this room without a single one of us if you'd had to. She glanced at James. And you'd have had him, which I suspect is worth more than all 12 of us combined. Natalie didn't answer that. She didn't trust her voice to. Rachel started gathering her folders, brisk and satisfied. There's paperwork, she said. Weeks of it. The criminal referral, the internal audit, unwinding whatever Victor's touched. But the hard part's done. As of about 90 seconds ago, Ms. Brooks, you are unambiguously in control of your father's company, and no one in this room or out of it can say otherwise. She snapped her briefcase shut. You did the thing I told you to do. You carried the truth through the door. The rest was always going to take care of itself. You made it take care of itself, Natalie said. I made it efficient, Rachel corrected. You made it true. Different jobs. She shook Natalie's hand, then James's, and to James, she said quieter. You're Sophie. Bring her by the office sometime. Last time I saw that kid, she was 3 and sad. I'd like to meet the version who teaches people to make pancakes. And then she was gone off to do the unglamorous machinery that turns a good moment into a permanent one. James and Natalie stood in the emptying boardroom, and for the first time in 12 days, there was nothing to plan. No door to lock, no next move to anticipate. It's over, Natalie said, like she couldn't quite believe the shape of the words. That part's over, James said. Yeah, she looked at him. In the light of the tall windows, she looked younger than she had at his door that first night, the fear gone out of her, and something new in its place. That part, she repeated. You said that part. I did. What's the other part? James looked at her for a long moment. 12 days ago, he'd pulled her half dead out of a black harbor and told himself the story ended there. It hadn't. It had barely begun. The other part, he said, we agreed to talk about after, and I think he checked his watch, and something almost like a smile touched his mouth. I think it's after. But not there, not in a glass boardroom that still smelled like a war. There's a little girl, James said, who's been fed dinner by a 71-year-old woman and is currently waiting on a porch with the light on, and I made her a promise this morning that I'd come home. So, whatever the other part is, it happens at home. If that's all right with you. Home, Natalie said softly, testing the word. You keep saying that like it includes me. I keep saying it that way, James said, because for 12 days it has, and I've had a lot of time on a lot of cold back steps to think about whether that was just the war making it feel that way, or whether it was real. He held her eyes. I told you I wouldn't be another man who took advantage of you when you were drowning. I meant it. So I waited. I made us both wait. Well, you're not drowning anymore, Natalie. You just walked into the hardest room of your life and won it standing on your own 2 feet, with your own voice holding your own truth. Nobody pulled you out of that water. You climbed out yourself. He took a breath. So now I can ask you honestly, with both of us standing on solid ground. The thing at the dinner table, the thing on the back steps. Was it real for you? Or was it the water talking? Natalie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, The first night at your door, I told you I'd been driving around for 2 hours looking for one person I could trust, and there was nobody. Do you remember? I remember. I lied a little, she said. Not on purpose. I didn't understand it yet. I wasn't looking for someone I could trust to save me. I've been saved before my father saved me from things by controlling me. Victor saved me from things by caging me. I've had a lifetime of men saving me. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I was looking for someone who'd let me save myself, and stand next to me while I did it, and catch me only if I actually fell, not because he'd decided I was too weak to stand. She took a shaking breath. I didn't have a word for that when I knocked on your door. I do now. It's you, James. It was always going to be you from the second you jumped into that water instead of doing the math like everyone else. So no, it wasn't the water talking. The water almost killed me. You're the thing that made me want to live like this again. James didn't say anything for a moment. He wasn't a man who had a lot of words for the biggest things. So he did the thing he did best. He closed the distance, and he reached out, and he took her hand the way he'd taken it that first night to help her in from the cold. Except this time, it wasn't to lead her anywhere. It was just to hold it. Then let's go home, he said. Both my girls are waiting. And Natalie made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob at the word both at finally being included in a sentence like that, and she held on to his hand, and they left the glass room together. Mrs. Delgado had the porch light on exactly like she'd promised. She opened the door before they'd reached the steps, and she took one look at the two of them, at their joined hands, at the fear finally gone from both their faces, and the old Navy widow who'd buried a husband, and watched James mourn behind drawn curtains for 3 years, pressed her hand to her mouth. Well, she said, it's about time. Ma'am, don't ma'am me. I've been telling you for 3 years those walls were keeping the lonely things safe, not the important things. Looks like somebody finally proved me right. She stepped back from the door. She's inside. She's been asking every 15 minutes if her daddy's home yet, and about an hour ago, she started asking if Natalie was coming too. Natalie's breath caught. Go on, Mrs. Delgado said gently. Both of you. Go be a family. God knows this street could use one. Sophie came barreling down the hall the second she heard the door, and she launched herself at James, and he caught her the way he'd caught her 10,000 times, and she wrapped her whole self around him. Daddy, did you win? Did the bad man go away? We won, sailor, James said into her hair. The bad man's gone. For good. For real good, not coming back good. For real good. Not coming back. Ever. And Sophie, satisfied with that, wriggled around in his arms until she could see over his shoulder to where Natalie stood in the doorway, not sure she was allowed to come further in. "Natalie," Sophie said, delighted. "Are you staying?" "Daddy said we'd see. Is it see yes or see no?" James felt Natalie go still behind him. He turned slowly, Sophie still in his arms, so that the three of them were looking at each other in the warm hallway of a house that had held 2 people for 3 years and had never once felt full until the last 12 days. "That's up to Natalie, baby," James said quietly. "But if it were up to me," he looked at her, and he let her see all of it. Everything he wasn't good at saying, it'd be see yes. It'd be yes for as long as she wanted. Natalie looked at the two of them, the father and the daughter, the whole small, stubborn world James had built out of nothing but love and refusal to quit, and she understood finally that this was the thing she'd been drowning toward her entire life, without ever knowing its name. "See, yes," she whispered. And then stronger to Sophie, so the little girl would have no doubt. "Yes, I'm staying, if you'll have me." "Obviously," said Sophie, with the withering practicality of a 6-year-old. And both adults laughed, and the sound of it filled the little house near the naval base, and something that had been broken in that house for 3 years, quietly finally finished healing. The months that came after weren't a fairy tale, because James Carter didn't believe in those, and neither anymore did Natalie. They were better than a fairy tale. They were real. Victor Langford was indicted on fraud charges that autumn, the shell companies, the misappropriated funds, the bought evaluation from a doctor who, facing charges of his own, turned on Victor immediately and completely. He didn't go to prison for as long as some people thought he should, the way men with money rarely do. But his empire was gone. His reputation was gone. The circles he'd spent his life climbing into closed against him like water over a stone. And every so often someone would repeat the story of what had actually happened at that harbor. The man who watched a woman drown and timed his rescue for the cameras, and that story followed Victor Langford for the rest of his life, which was, James thought, a more fitting sentence than any courtroom could have handed down. Because the thing he'd tried to do to Natalie, bury a person under a story, was the exact thing that buried him in the end. Natalie ran Brooks Maritime, and she ran it well, the way her father had never once let himself believe she could. She was quieter than her father had been, and sharper than Victor had ever guessed. And within a year, the board that had almost let her be stolen from was following her lead without a second thought. Margaret became something like a mentor, and something like the mother Natalie had lost at 9, and the two of them rebuilt the parts of the company Victor had hollowed out. And James kept serving. He still woke at 4:45. He still put on the uniform. He still packed Sophie's lunch, though now there were 2 people in the kitchen most mornings, and the pancakes had gotten considerably better. The walls he'd spent 3 years building came down slowly, one at a time, the way walls always come down, not in a single dramatic collapse, but brick by brick. Until one morning, he noticed they simply weren't there anymore, and he could see clear to the horizon, and it didn't frighten him. He thought about Claire sometimes, and it didn't hurt the way it used to. He'd been so sure for 3 years that letting himself love again would be a betrayal of her. Mrs. Delgado had set him straight on that the way she set him straight on everything. "Your Claire didn't die so you could stop living," the old woman told him. "She died, that's all. It's the worst thing that ever happened to you, and it doesn't have a meaning, and you don't have to earn your way past it by suffering. She loved you. She'd have hated watching you turn to stone. Let her rest, James, and let yourself live." And slowly he had. Natalie did one more thing the following spring that James didn't find out about until it was done. She started a foundation. She used her own money, her father's money made clean again, and she built something for the people she'd come to understand better than anyone. The ones fighting their hardest battles, not on any battlefield, but at home alone. She built it for military families, for the single parents serving far from home, The ones who came back from protecting millions of strangers to face empty houses and grief and custody battles, and the particular loneliness of being strong for a child when there's no one left to be strong for you. She called it the Guardian Families Initiative. There are people, she said the day she told James the two of them standing at the same harbor where all of it had started, who spend their whole lives running toward the thing everyone else runs from. And then they come home and they fight the hardest fight of all completely alone, and nobody jumps in the water for them. I wanted to build the thing that jumps in the water for them, because somebody built it for me once. Except it wasn't a thing. It was a man. She looked at him. You. It was always you. James was quiet for a long time, looking out at the water that had nearly taken them both. You know what I thought that night, he said. When I jumped in, I thought I'm saving a stranger. Do my duty, go home, never see her again. That's the whole story. He shook his head slowly. I had it exactly backwards. I thought I was pulling somebody out of the water, but the truth is, I'd been the one drowning. For 3 years. Slow drowning, the kind nobody can see, where you keep going through the motions and telling everyone you're fine and getting colder every single day. He turned to her. You didn't knock on my door because you needed saving, Natalie. You knocked on my door and pulled me out. I just didn't understand that's what was happening until it was already done. Down by the water, Sophie was chasing gulls, shrieking with laughter. A child who had never once doubted, not for a single day of her whole life, that her father would come home. And now there were 2 people who'd make sure of it. Natalie took James's hand. Do you ever think about it? She asked. How close it was, 50 people on that pier. If any one of them had jumped first, if the rescue crews had been 30 seconds faster, we'd never have... No, James said. I don't think about it that way, and you shouldn't either. He watched his daughter chase the birds. 50 people did the math. I've made my peace with why. Cold water, dark night, somebody else's problem. The math says, stay on the pier. The math is right most of the time. That's what keeps most people alive and dry and safe behind their walls. He squeezed her hand. But every so often the world needs somebody who doesn't run the math. Who just goes. And it doesn't make them brave exactly. And it doesn't make them special. It just makes them the kind of person who couldn't live with themselves if they stayed on the pier. That's all I ever was. I'm just glad for once in my life that being unable to stay on the pier gave me this instead of costing me everything. The wind came off the harbor cold and clean and honest, the way it had the night it all began. James Carter had spent 19 years believing that the measure of a man was what he could survive. The storms, the missions, the loss. The slow, silent drowning of grief that no one else could see. He'd built his whole self around endurance, around walls, around carrying his pain, folded up small where nobody could touch it, and he'd called that strength. He knew better now. Because the strongest thing he'd ever done wasn't jumping into that freezing water. It wasn't even winning the custody battle, or standing in that boardroom, or facing down a powerful man with nothing but the truth. The strongest thing he'd ever done was open a door at 12:43 in the morning to a frightened stranger, and let her in, and let her matter, and let himself be loved again, after he'd sworn he never would. Real heroes aren't the people who never suffer. James understood that, now all the way down. They're the ones who carry the suffering and refuse to let it turn them to stone, and when they see somebody else going under in the cold and the dark, they jump anyway. Every time. No matter the water. And that is exactly the kind of man James Carter chose to be until the very end of his days.